March, 1943. The North Atlantic, a merciless expanse of grey, churning water some 400 miles south of Iceland. For 47 days, this had been the world of ordinary seaman Danny O'Connor. At 19, with no formal technical training to his name, only the sharp wits forged in the backstreets of Liverpool, he stood on the pitching steel deck of the destroyer, HMS Hesperus, and watched the empty ocean. The wind, a razor-edged thing, cut through his duffel coat, but the cold he felt was deeper than the flesh. It was a cold born of 47 days of gnawing tension and the ghosts of 14 lost ships from their convoy, their dying screams swallowed by these very waves. His world was a cacophony of spectral sounds and unseen threats. The ASDIC operator would call out echoes that shimmered and vanished, phantoms in the deep. The radar scope, a cyclopean green eye, saw nothing beneath the waves where the true menace lay. The U-boats, the wolf packs, would strike with savage efficiency, sending a Liberty ship or a tanker to the depths in a bloom of fire and oil, only to submerge and disappear as if they had been a nightmare given form for a fleeting, terrible moment. Danny's gaze drifted from the grim horizon to a neat stack of tins lashed beside the superstructure. They were unremarkable, merely 5-gallon drums of standard-issue Admiralty zinc oxide marine paint, intended for the endless, Sisyphean task of ship maintenance. They were there to fight the patient, relentless war against the sea's corrosive bite. But in the mind of this young rating from the Mersey, a thought had just taken root. It was an idea so utterly daft, so profoundly simple in a war of complex machinery and arcane calculations, that it possessed the lunatic gleam of genius. It was an idea that just might work. At 23 minutes past 11 that morning, Danny O'Connor, his resolve hardening with each step, made his way to the bridge. He approached Commander Thomas Hughes, his commanding officer. Hughes was the very model of a Royal Navy officer, a veteran of 18 years' service, a graduate of the Britannia Royal Naval College at Dartmouth, his quiet authority honed in 3 naval campaigns. He stood hunched over the chart table, his world reduced to lines of longitude and latitude, a pencil tracing the convoy's precarious path. "Sir," Danny began, his voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. "I have a proposal, sir. Regarding the U-boats." Hughes did not look up. The slightest hint of weary impatience entered his voice. "O'Connor, you're an ordinary seaman. Your job is to chip paint and holystone the decks, not to devise anti-submarine tactics for the Admiralty." The dismissal was polite, absolute, and reinforced by the unbridgeable gulf between a commissioned officer from Dartmouth and a rating from Liverpool. "I know it sounds absurd, sir," Danny pressed on, his voice dropping slightly. "But what if we used the paint?" Now, Hughes looked up. The pencil in his hand paused. His eyes, the color of the sea on a winter's day, fixed on the young man. "Paint?" "Yes, sir. The white paint. We pour it into the ocean, right where we think the U-boat is." Danny's words tumbled out, the idea that had seemed so clear in his mind now sounding impossibly naive in the hallowed quiet of the bridge. "If there's a U-boat submerged, the paint will stick to its periscope when it comes up for a look. It wouldn't be able to see a thing, sir. It'd be blind." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the groan of the ship's timbers and the distant hum of the turbines. The 3 other officers on the bridge, the sub-lieutenant, the navigator, and the officer of the watch, stared at Danny as if he had just suggested navigating by dowsing rod. Finally, Hughes spoke, his voice dangerously soft. "O'Connor. That is, without a doubt, the single most ridiculous thing I have heard in my 18 years of service." He leaned back against the chart table, his condescension now overt. "The U-boats don't keep their periscopes up indefinitely, you realize. The paint would disperse in the current in a matter of seconds. And even if, by some miracle, it worked, how much paint do you imagine we carry?" "We have 340 imperial gallons in the bosun's store, sir," Danny replied immediately, the facts ready on his tongue. "And they do raise their periscopes, sir. Every 8 to 12 minutes when they're tracking a convoy. It's in the German tactical manual. The one we captured from U-110 last year." Hughes stared at Danny for 7 long, unbroken seconds. The other officers exchanged uneasy glances. "You've read the captured German tactical manual?" "Yes, sir," Danny said, a faint flush rising on his cheeks. "It was on the wardroom table. I read it whilst I was cleaning." What Danny O'Connor had grasped, with an intuition that eluded the trained naval engineers and strategists, was a critical flaw in German operational doctrine. The Type VIIC U-boats, the workhorses of Donit's fleet, operated with a rigid, predictable precision. Their captains were instructed to submerge immediately after an attack, run for a few hundred meters, and then raise the periscope for a quick, all-round sweep to confirm they were not being hunted. Those 8 to 12 minutes between observations were their Achilles heel. And the Admiralty's zinc oxide marine paint possessed a peculiar, almost magical quality. It was formulated to adhere instantly and tenaciously to damp metal surfaces. Once it bonded, only industrial solvent and hard scrubbing could remove it. Seawater, no matter how agitated, was utterly useless against it. Commander Hughes, a man bound by procedure and the chain of command, did not authorize the method. To do so based on the harebrained theory of a teenage rating would have been career suicide. Instead, he took the proposal, with considerable trepidation, to the escort group commander, Captain Robert Whitman, a man who commanded 6 destroyers in a hunter-killer formation and whose temper was as feared as a winter gale. Whitman's response, relayed by signal lamp, was as direct as it was brutal. "Hughes, if I find you're letting a 19-year-old rating design your anti-submarine tactics, I will have you relieved of your command. Is that understood?" But then, fate intervened, as it so often does in the crucible of war. On the 28th of March, 1943, at 14:37 hours, a signal flared from the convoy Commodore. Convoy HX-229 was under attack. Within 11 minutes, the placid grey seascape was scarred by the fiery pyres of 5 merchant ships. The U-boat, its work done, had submerged and vanished before the escort screen could react. HMS Hesperus raced towards the scene, her ASDIC pinging desperately into the depths. They found the telltale sign, a shimmering, iridescent slick of diesel fuel on the water. The Wolf was close, very close, but had gone deep, lurking at its operational depth of 110 meters, a steel ghost invisible to the ASDIC beam. Danny was on deck, part of a damage control party. He saw the diesel slick, a stain of defeat on the surface of the sea. He saw the calm, indifferent water. And he saw the tins of paint. Without authorization, without consulting a soul, acting on pure, desperate instinct, Danny O'Connor unlashed 2 5-gallon drums. He hefted them, one in each arm, the 40 pounds of weight in each a solid, tangible thing in a world of shadows. He walked to the stern, and with 2 sharp movements, poured 40 gallons of thick, white paint directly over the diesel slick. The paint hit the water and blossomed, a viscous, opaque cloud that expanded into a milky nebula 60 meters across. From the bridge, Hughes saw it all. A dark flush of pure fury rose up his neck. He was on the verge of ordering O'Connor clapped in irons when the port lookout screamed, his voice cracking with urgency, "Periscope! Periscope! Bearing green 40. 400 yards." The U-boat, U-487, had come up for a look. Its commander, Captain Lieutenant Friedrich Braun, was following his training manual to the letter. His periscope sliced through the surface directly in the center of the white cloud. Braun, expecting to see the satisfying vista of burning ships and a panicked convoy, saw nothing. His optics were coated in a thick, white, impenetrable film. He tried rotating the periscope, but the paint clung fast. Water could not shift it. In the cramped, sweat-soaked confines of the U-boat's control room, panic began to set in. Braun had 3 choices, each more terrible than the last. He could surface completely to clean the optics, an act of suicide with a destroyer known to be nearby. He could attempt to operate blind, submerged, near a convoy and its hunter-killer escorts, an impossibility. Or he could retreat without confirming the results of his attack, an unacceptable failure under the strict doctrines issued by Admiral Donitz. Braun, his tactical Bible rendered useless, made the fatal choice. He chose to surface. At 14:52 hours, U-487 broke the surface 380 yards off Hesperus's port beam. Her periscope was a stark, ghostly white against the grey hull. German ratings spilled from the conning tower, clutching rags, desperate to clear the lens. They never had the chance. At 14:53, the forward 4.7-inch guns of HMS Hesperus opened fire with a deafening roar. The first shell struck the conning tower, a direct hit. The second tore through the pressure hull. The third hit below the waterline. At 14:56, just 19 minutes after Danny O'Connor had poured the paint, U-487 slipped beneath the waves for the last time, taking all 56 of her crew with her. Hughes did not place O'Connor under arrest. Instead, he wrote a detailed report for the Admiralty's Anti-Submarine Warfare Command. Its title was Dry, Precise, and Utterly Revolutionary: The Unconventional Tactical Use of Marine Paint as a Submarine Blinding Weapon. 48 hours later, a coded message arrived from London. Proposal approved for experimental implementation. Supplies of zinc oxide paint being dispatched to all Atlantic escort groups. Report all results. What the men in Whitehall could not possibly have anticipated was how devastatingly effective this simple method would prove to be. By mid-April, HMS Hesperus had received her new primary armament, 620 gallons of paint, stored in neat rows of 20-gallon drums. Commander Hughes, his Dartmouth training now bent to a new and bizarre reality, reorganized his ship's entire attack doctrine. The new procedure was simple and lethal. When the ASDIC operator gained a submerged contact, Hesperus would not immediately begin a depth charge run. Instead, she would steam over the U-boat's estimated position and deploy a circular screen of 40 to 60 gallons of paint, creating a 100-meter-wide blind spot on the ocean surface. Then, they would wait. The German commanders, creatures of habit and training, would follow their doctrine. They would raise their periscopes every 8 to 12 minutes. But now, as the polished lens broke the surface, it would be instantly blinded. A blind U-boat had only two options: surface or flee. Both were fatal. The first victory under the new doctrine came on the 3rd of April. U-563, its periscope coated in paint, surfaced to clear it. Hesperus sank her in 6 minutes. The second came on the 8th of April. U-419, blinded and disoriented, attempted to operate submerged and collided with a freighter. Damaged and forced to the surface, it was destroyed by gunfire. The third came on the 11th of April. U-526, its optics painted over, aborted its attack and fled. It was hounded by 4 destroyers for hours and finally obliterated by depth charges. But the Germans were not fools. The Kriegsmarine boasted some of the finest naval engineers in the world, and the Befehlshaber der U-Boot, Admiral Donitz's U-Boat High Command, analyzed every loss with forensic intensity. By the 15th of April, Donitz himself had received 3 separate reports from surviving U-boat commanders describing mysterious, dense white clouds appearing on the water just before an attack. The German response was swift and logical. A new tactical order was issued to the entire U-boat fleet: do not raise periscope if any visible substance is present on the water. Operate on passive hydrophones only until the area is confirmed clear. This should have neutralized O'Connor's method completely. Instead, the Germans had unwittingly made a catastrophic tactical error. By forbidding their commanders from using their periscopes, they had blinded themselves. They were now forced to rely solely on sound, and the Allied destroyers possessed a crucial advantage the Germans had not anticipated: quiet, low-frequency diesel engines that were exceptionally difficult for German hydrophones to detect effectively at depths below 90 meters. By May of 1943, the white cloud tactic had been adopted as standard doctrine across the Atlantic escort fleets, and refined. They no longer waited for an ASDIC contact. Now, destroyers patrolling the known convoy routes would preemptively deploy paint slicks every few hundred meters, creating vast fields of blindness 2 or 3 kilometers long. German U-boats attempting to penetrate these zones without their periscopes were operating in a deaf and blind world. They could not confirm the positions of their targets, could not calculate torpedo vectors, could not verify range. They faced an impossible choice: attack blind, wasting precious torpedoes, or retreat without attacking, which was a dereliction of duty under Donitz' harsh orders. The tally of victories grew. On the 7th of May, U-209 fired 4 torpedoes blind, all missed. It was promptly depth-charged and sunk. On the 12th of May, U-258 retreated from a paint zone and was hunted for 14 hours before being destroyed. On the 19th of May, U-954 surfaced outside a paint field to observe the convoy, was immediately detected by radar, and sunk in 9 minutes. The Kriegsmarine Chemical Warfare Division worked feverishly, developing a solvent that could theoretically clean the zinc oxide paint underwater. It was distributed to the fleet in June. It did not work. The solvent required 8 to 12 minutes of continuous application to be effective. No U-boat could afford to keep its periscope exposed for 12 minutes without being detected by ever-improving Allied radar. In July, a desperate Donitz issued an impossible order. All U-boats were to conduct their approach and attack runs completely without periscopes, relying solely on dead reckoning and hydrophone data. The U-boat commanders knew it was a suicide mission, but orders were orders. On the 4th of July, U-628 attacked blind, missed with 3 torpedoes, and was sunk. On the 11th of July, U-535, attacking blind, managed to torpedo an empty, straggling freighter before being sunk itself 30 minutes later. On the 18th of July, the commander of U-613 refused to attack without visual confirmation and returned to base. He was promptly relieved of his command and reassigned to the Eastern Front. In August of 1943, Allied Anti-Submarine Command published classified statistics that told the whole story. Before the paint method, the Allies were losing 96 ships a month, while destroying 8 U-boats. After the paint method, Allied losses had plummeted to 31 ships a month, while U-boat kills had soared to 23. The exchange rate had been completely inverted. Germany was now losing more U-boats than its shipyards could build. On the 3rd of September, 1943, Admiral Karl Donitz wrote in his private war diary, "The U-boats can no longer operate effectively in the North Atlantic. The losses are unsustainable. The submarine war has failed." 3 days later, he ordered the mass withdrawal of the wolf packs from the North Atlantic. The Battle of the Atlantic was over. The Allies had won. And it had all begun with a 19-year-old sailor from Liverpool and a few tins of paint. Danny O'Connor was promoted to petty officer in October 1943. In a private ceremony that November, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal, one of the highest honors available to a naval rating. The citation read, "For extraordinary tactical initiative resulting in the destruction of multiple enemy units and decisively altering the course of the war in the Atlantic." Danny never spoke publicly of his method. The official records remained classified until 1976. By the time they were unsealed, he was long gone. He had passed away from natural causes in 1968, at his home in Portsmouth. He was only 44 years old. For the last 2 decades of his life, he had worked as a primary school teacher. None of his pupils, as they learned their sums and letters, ever knew that their quiet, unassuming teacher had changed the course of the Second World War with nothing more than white paint. HMS Hesperus continued her anti-submarine operations until May of 1945, credited with sinking 13 U-boats in total. 11 of those kills were a direct result of the paint method. Today, the tactic is obsolete, a curious footnote in naval history, superseded by sophisticated sonar, helicopters, and guided torpedoes. But in 1943, when the Atlantic was being lost and the U-boats seemed invincible, a young rating with no formal education looked at a stack of ordinary paint tins and saw a weapon. Sometimes the greatest solutions come not from engineering laboratories or military academies, but from the clear-eyed vision of a young man who reads the enemy's manuals while cleaning the decks. The war was not won only by generals and scientists, it was won by